Respondent will remember that Detroit, a high-crime city, is in Michigan. College students in the United States know this fact and will correctly identify Detroit as the largest city in Michigan. But knowledge of a fact is not all or none. Facts that we know do not always come to mind when we need them. People who remember that Detroit is in Michigan give higher estimates of the murder rate in the state than people who do not. But a majority of Frederick's respondents did not think of the city when questioned about the state. Indeed, the average guess by people who were asked about Michigan is lower than the guesses of a similar group who were asked about the murder rate in Detroit. Blame for a failure to think of Detroit can be laid on both System 1 and System 2. Whether the city comes to mind when the state is mentioned depends in part on the automatic function of memory. People differ in this respect. The representation of the state of Michigan is very detailed in some people's minds. Residents of the state are more likely to retrieve many facts about it than people who live elsewhere. Geography buffs will retrieve more than others who specialize in baseball statistics. More intelligent individuals are more likely than others to have rich representations of most things. Intelligence is not only the ability to reason, it is also the ability to find relevant material in memory and to deploy attention when needed. Memory function is an attribute of System 1. However, everyone has the option of slowing down to conduct an active search of memory for all possible relevant facts, just as they could slow down to check the intuitive answer in the bat and ball problem. The extent of deliberate checking and search is a characteristic of System 2, which varies among individuals. The bat and ball problem, the Flowers syllogism, and the Michigan-Detroit problem have something in common. Failing these mini-tests appears to be, at least to some extent, a matter of insufficient motivation, not trying hard enough. Anyone who can be admitted to a good university is certainly able to reason through the first two questions and to reflect about Michigan long enough to remember the major city in that state and its crime problem. These students can solve much more difficult problems when they are not tempted to accept a superficially plausible answer that comes readily to mind. The ease with which they are satisfied enough to stop thinking is rather troubling. Lazy is a harsh judgment about the self-monitoring of these young people and their System 2, but it does not seem to be unfair. Those who avoid the sin of intellectual sloth could be called engaged. They are more alert, more intellectually active, less willing to be satisfied with superficially attractive answers, more skeptical about their intuitions. The psychologist Keith Stanovich would call them more rational. Intelligence, control, rationality. Researchers have applied diverse methods to examine the connection between thinking and self-control. Some have addressed it by asking the correlation question. If people were ranked by their self-control and by their cognitive aptitude, would individuals have similar positions in the two rankings? In one of the most famous experiments in the history of psychology, Walter Mischel and his students exposed 4-year-old children to a cruel dilemma. They were given a choice between a small reward, 1 Oreo, which they could have at any time, or a larger reward, 2 cookies, for which they had to wait 15 minutes under difficult conditions. They were to remain alone in a room, facing a desk with 2 objects, a single cookie and a bell that the child could ring at any time to call in the experimenter and receive the 1 cookie. As the experiment was described, there were no toys, books, pictures, or other potentially distracting items in the room. The experimenter left the room and did not return until 15 minutes had passed, or the child had rung the bell, eaten the rewards, stood up, or shown any signs of distress. The children were watched through a one-way mirror, and the film that shows their behavior during the waiting time always has the audience roaring in laughter. About half the children managed the feat of waiting for 15 minutes, mainly by keeping their attention away from the tempting reward. 10 or 15 years later, a large gap had opened between those who had resisted temptation and those who had not. The resistors had higher measures of executive control in cognitive tasks, and especially the ability to reallocate their attention effectively. As young adults, they were less likely to take drugs. A significant difference in intellectual aptitude emerged. The children who had shown more self-control as 4-year-olds had substantially higher scores on tests of intelligence. A team of researchers at the University of Oregon explored the link between cognitive control and intelligence in several ways, including an attempt to raise intelligence by improving the control of attention. During 5 40-minute sessions, they exposed children aged 4 to 6 to various computer games especially designed to demand attention and control. In one of the exercises, the children used a joystick to track a cartoon cat and move it to a grassy area while avoiding a muddy area. The grassy areas gradually shrank and the muddy area expanded, requiring progressively more precise control. The testers found that training attention not only improved executive control, scores on nonverbal tests of intelligence also improved, and the improvement was maintained for several months. Other research by the same group identified specific genes that are involved in the control of attention, showed that parenting techniques also affected this ability, and demonstrated a close connection between the children's ability to control their attention and their ability to control their emotions. Shane Frederick constructed a cognitive reflection test, which consists of the bat and ball problem and 2 other questions, chosen because they also invite an intuitive answer that is both compelling and wrong. The questions are shown in Chapter 5. He went on to study the characteristics of students who score very low on this test. The supervisory function of System 2 is weak in these people, and found that they are prone to answer questions with the first idea that comes to mind and unwilling to invest the effort needed to check their intuitions. Individuals who uncritically follow their intuitions about puzzles are also prone to accept other suggestions from System 1. In particular, they are impulsive, impatient, and keen to receive immediate gratification. For example, 63% of the intuitive respondents say they would prefer to get $3,400 this month rather than $3,800 next month. Only 37% of those who solve all 3 puzzles correctly have the same short-sighted preference for receiving a smaller amount immediately. When asked how much they will pay to get overnight delivery of a book they have ordered, the low scorers on the cognitive reflection test are willing to pay twice as much as the high scorers. Frederick's findings suggest that the characters in our psychodrama have different personalities. System 1 is impulsive and intuitive. System 2 is capable of reasoning, and it is cautious, but at least for some people, it is also lazy. We recognize related differences among individuals. Some people are more like their System 2, others closer to their System 1. This simple test has emerged as one of the better predictors of lazy thinking. Keith Stanovich and his longtime collaborator Richard West originally introduced the terms System 1 and System 2. They now prefer to speak of type 1 and type 2 processes. Stanovich and his colleagues have spent decades studying differences among individuals in the kinds of problems with which this book is concerned. They have asked one basic question in many different ways. What makes some people more susceptible than others to biases of judgment? Stanovich published his conclusions in a book titled Rationality and the Reflective Mind, which offers a bold and distinctive approach to the topic of this chapter. He draws a sharp distinction between two parts of System 2. Indeed, the distinction is so sharp that he calls them separate minds. One of these minds, he calls it algorithmic, deals with slow thinking and demanding computation. Some people are better than others in these tasks of brain power. They are individuals who excel in intelligence tests and are able to switch from one task to another quickly and efficiently. However, Stanovich argues that high intelligence does not make people immune to biases. Another ability is involved, which he labels rationality. Stanovich's concept of a rational person is similar to what I earlier labeled engaged. The core of his argument is that rationality should be distinguished from intelligence. In his view, superficial or lazy thinking is a flaw in the reflective mind, a failure of rationality. This is an attractive and thought-provoking idea. In support of it, Stanovich and his colleagues have found that the bat and ball question and others like it are somewhat better indicators of our susceptibility to cognitive errors than our conventional measures of intelligence, such as IQ tests. Time will tell whether the distinction between intelligence and rationality can lead to new discoveries. Speaking of control. She did not have to struggle to stay on task for hours. She was in a state of flow. His ego was depleted after a long day of meetings, so he just turned to standard operating procedures instead of thinking through the problem. He didn't bother to check whether what he said made sense. Does he usually have a lazy system too, or was he unusually tired? Unfortunately, she tends to say the first thing that comes into her mind. She probably also has trouble delaying gratification. Weak System 2. Chapter 4. The Associative Machine. To begin your exploration of the surprising workings of System 1, listen to the following words. Bananas. Vomit. A lot happened to you during the last second or two. You experienced some unpleasant images and memories. Your face twisted slightly in an expression of disgust, and you may have shifted imperceptibly farther away. Your heart rate increased, the hair on your arms rose a little, and your sweat glands were activated. In short, you responded to the disgusting word with an attenuated version of how you would react to the real thing. All of this was completely automatic, beyond your control. There was no particular reason to do so, but your mind automatically assumed a temporal sequence and a causal connection between the words bananas and vomit, forming a sketchy scenario in which bananas caused the sickness. As a result, you are experiencing a temporary aversion to bananas. Don't worry, it will pass. The state of your memory has changed in other ways. You are now unusually ready to recognize and respond to objects and concepts associated with vomit, such as sick, stink, or nausea, and words associated with bananas, such as yellow and fruit, and perhaps apple and berries. Vomiting normally occurs in specific contexts, such as hangovers and indigestion. You would also be unusually ready to recognize words associated with